Hi. Yes, as Rachel just said, we are going to talk about what the future of the service layer looks like. I'm delighted to welcome on stage with me Fiona Smith, Shula Sinclair, and Belinda from a consultancy, an agency, and a brand. So before we get into it, if I could have a brief introduction from each of you. Fiona, let's start with you.
Hi, Fiona Davis from Infinitive. We're a boutique marketing media consulting firm based out of the States, but work with global clients.
Excellent. Shula.
Hi, I'm Shula Sinclair, Global Head of Strategy at Spark Foundry. Been around.
That could be taken any number of ways, Shula.
You stole my intro. Belinda Smith, EA. I run media globally for EA.
Excellent, thank you, ladies. So we're here to talk about kind of what the future of the service layer looks like. We've got agencies going into consulting. We've got consultancies starting to plan and execute media. We've got brands that are starting to try and build their own ad tech and move into that space. What the bloody hell is going on? Fiona, as the kind of one completely sort of independent, should we say, you're not in media, what is your stance of this as an independent consultant that doesn't kind of deal with any of the other side of things?
Yeah, I think it's quite interesting for companies our size and the type of work that we're doing, because we're not in the same space as Deloitte and Accenture that are buying up agencies and basically competing head-to-head with the agencies for the actual media buying itself as well as the consulting side of the house. So, we definitely see a huge amount of a shift from the global marketers to the focus for them internally is so much around attribution and being able to justify all of their marketing spend, including media. So it's kind of forced a whole, the strategy that they're putting together has to be much more holistic than it has been previously. And if you're going to do true cross-channel marketing, you can't just be thinking about media as a standalone proposition, and it has to fit much more succinctly with the rest of your direct marketing. So whether that's email, literally physical mail, in-store, whatever it is, the expectation internally is that you are able to speak across all of that stack now rather than just talk about media. But in my mind, the agency's strength is they specialise in media and they know more about it than anybody else. So when it gets down to execution, that is where their strong suit is. I think they're feeling the pressure more from the Accentures and Deloittes in the world because they are buying up competitors of theirs, or they're buying up literally whole chunks of agencies to compete with them head to head. So there's quite a bit of consolidation happening, but there's also huge opportunity for people like us that are in a very specialised area where people want a specialist to come in, tell them what to do, and then get the hell out of the way and let them do their jobs. Make sense?
It absolutely does make sense. And Shula, you've been around apparently. In your varied roles, kind of what kind of things have you seen brands that you work, clients that you work with do, and kind of what are agencies doing? So, for example, what is Spark Foundry doing? Are you getting into the consultancy side of things, or are you still focused on the business of media?
I think we're in a state of flux, and we have been for years, and I think everyone in this room is experiencing the benefits and the downsides of that. I think what we are doing at Spark Foundry is beginning with our core strength. We know where our expertise lies and building out organically from there. I would just say to your point, I would not put agencies in an execution box and say that is their role.
Of course you wouldn't.
Don't worry. But that's also based upon my being around a bit. I do believe that agencies with 10 years of experience, particularly in programmatic and search, can bring strategic value to the table. And clients that are open to that strategic conversation are certainly seeing the upside.
Interesting. And of course, the margins aren't there if you're just focusing on execution and there's nothing else above it. Belinda, I'm interested to find out how EA is set up.
In the most convoluted way possible. So we have we've in-housed a lot of our media capabilities. So we do almost all of our digital buying. We do programmatic search and social in-house. We own our contracts and paperwork with the tech stack. We have custom EA built solutions around that tech stack. We do all of our analytics. We do our proprietary MTA attribution on media. We do our own media strategy and planning. We also partner with a global agency to do media strategy and planning on the what we call the fixed side of the house, which is like broadcast linear. And then my team is responsible for managing that agency relationship and making sure that those plans all get tied together with what we're doing staying in-house and ladder up to our campaign strategy.
So where you do employ an agency for the, I guess, more traditional media side of things,
Yeah.
How involved are they in the strategic side of things? Or is that very much done by you guys in-house? Or is it collaborative?
It varies. Quite frankly, we'd like for all of it to be done in-house.
Mm-hmm.
There are considerations when we're thinking about, like, how are we going to market FIFA in Saudi Arabia? We don't have experts that can answer that question in-house, and we don't really want to staff a specific expert just to focus on that one question. Having a global agency or a global agency roster really helps you fill in the gaps when it doesn't make sense to bring on that full-time role. As we've gone through this journey, we think a lot also just about career planning and career pathing and development for our people. And there are certain roles that just don't make sense to sit in-house, and it's good to be able to lean into an agency for those capabilities as well.
Would you ever build your own tech?
Oh yeah, we have.
You have done?
Yeah.
And that, the investment in that and the kind of the time investment and the monetary investment was worth it versus just getting something else to... getting something else's tech that already exists.
It's a good question. So I actually started out my career at AT&T and helped create AdWorks. And I would say that was an example of when building your own tech wasn't worth it. It wasn't our core business. It was something we were kind of dabbling into, was not a strategic focus in 2010 at that point of the company. And so we made different decisions there. EA, by its nature, is a games publisher, so we're sitting on about 10,000 engineers and developers and data scientists and analytics folks, so it makes a lot of sense for us to build our own solutions in-house, bridge gaps that we see in the marketplace, and really we are hyper concerned with transparency and understanding how things work. So yes, it's worth it for us. It's also a little bit of a shit show because when you try to build your own things on top of stacks that already exist, and then you get, the email from Google that they're not giving you DCMIDs anymore, and you have to rethink how you've built everything. So it's very, very time and labor intensive. But for the type of talent that we have at EA, we've found it to be worth it.
Mm-hmm. You build games, so that I guess there's an element of crossover there in terms of the requirements that you would require when it comes to advertising and marketing technology. Shula, with some of the brands you've worked with, I hear that some of them try and build tech. Do you think it's always the right approach?
So, listening to you, I'm totally convinced by your model for your sector. But I've heard similar aspirations and ambitions from dairy companies. So
they want to build ad
really,
tech.
no, but I'm not even kidding. Yeah, they want to build the tech. They want to build everything in house. And that's
why.
Well, good question. And that's where I'm personally concerned that there's a designer trend perhaps set by the gaming and the more tech-inclined companies that perhaps, other companies that don't naturally lean into that area of capability suddenly decide to buy it in and build it themselves. And I think that's a risky strategy. So we're seeing from the media agency side that there amongst certain clients, I wouldn't say it's a sweeping trend, but amongst certain clients, there's a desire to house as much as possible. And coming from a media agency, we don't believe you can just buy in the 10 years plus of experience that we've acquired across multiple sectors and markets, etc., by hiring a few people and investing some cash.
Also, to answer the question of the why, it's trust and it's money. Mm-hmm. I think that, just people on Earth in general are so tired of reading Exchange Wired and Ad Exchanger and being like, oh, fuck, bid caching. Like, what does that mean? What do I have to do about that?
We may get onto that later.
Yeah, it's just one thing after another, and you start to think like, well, screw that. I want to control the thing myself, and I think that leads people to potentially bad decisions of like, that means I have to build it myself. And also, let's be very clear, like, in-housing, a big part of it is sold internally as a cost savings model. Mm-hmm. So I think the two things with like lack of trust in the section overall, and then people seeing like, actually, I could save a lot of money on my car insurance, like leads them to think that they can build it in-house.
I think also there's other reasons why people do it. One of our biggest clients is one of the banks in the States. There are certain variables that they cannot make public to any other external platform,
Yep.
so they don't have a
Yep.
choice. But also, that's the number one most asked question we get when we go in to do a consulting gig is, should I be building this or should I be buying it? And yet there are still companies out there, very large global companies, that will say stuff like, we think we want to build a DMP. I mean, I'm not kidding.
Yeah.
Where you've got to actually go through and pull apart the reasoning behind it and why people are trying to do things and saying, okay, this makes sense for you to build because you have restricted variables, you can't pass that off to a third party. But this stuff, I mean, literally had someone the other day ask me if they should build an ad server. I'm just like, have you been living under a rock? Like, yeah. So, and there's definitely there's so much new tech out there as well that people literally, like, CDPs is the hot buzz. Everybody, oh, should we buy one? Should we build one? And there's just so many people pitching themselves in the space with completely different products and coming at it from totally different angles, that people are just like, I genuinely don't know what to do here. And these are very technical people. Like, we had an entire tech team, super smart people, data scientists, that are saying, I'm not actually sure what I should do here. Should I do X or should I do Y? And sometimes they'll make a decision to build just because they don't know what else to do. And they'll build something and a year later go, that was a really bad idea. I think we need to go back and buy something off the shelf. So it's a tough space to... When it's new tech, it's very hard to make that decision and evaluate it in the right way. So.
Yeah. I want to get into kind of the intricacies of overcoming these barriers, kind of, you know, and whose responsibility that is. But at this point, I think it's a good idea to kind of go into something that should frame the conversation slightly. So this was, there we go, developed by our very own Kieran O'Kane. It's AdTech are at its finest. But basically, it shows when we talk about enterprise businesses versus outcomes businesses and what the difference between those are. So if we think about enterprise businesses, the first thing you'll go to is probably a CPG, the likes of Unilever, P&G, where it's very, very difficult for them to tie what they do in a media business back to a real business outcome. It's, you know, and they can try and fail, but actually, if they aren't the people that are selling Fairy Liquid, it's very, very difficult for them to work out what's worked and what's not. And then you've got the outcome side of things where people are able to actually tie things back. You know, gaming platforms are a fantastic example of outcomes, tying things back to a real business outcome. It's not just about whether they clicked, whether they installed the app, it's whether they went to use it, whether they actually paid something, whether they reactivated it, whatever. And there's a fascinating mix between those. Belinda, I'm fascinated from your perspective as an outcomes advertiser, kind of how you've managed to, I guess, organise yourself structurally to make sure that you aren't just buying media and then everything else is happening in a completely different silo somewhere else, how you're actually integrating all those different conversations together, and whether the in-housing and the tech building was a huge element to that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we started in-housing both media and creative about 5 years ago. And I would say at that point, the decision was based on two things. One, we were finally at a point where we had federated all of our first-party data and we were ready to activate on it, and we didn't see a solution in the market that we liked for that, and also privacy concerns as well, for sure. It's interesting, though, because we're an outcomes-based advertiser, but we're also an enterprise-based advertiser. There are places in my business that are closed-loop, fully attributable, that look like this. And then there are places in my business where, yeah, I have a third party that is selling the product for me, and they're not giving me any data back about it. So bringing tech, bringing media in-house has, I think, helped the company actually better understand how media works and how that informs our game's development cycle and how we think about the future of our business and evolving business models. But there's also just a huge element of transparency that we feel that we've gained. I think one of the ways that we were able to achieve that is most of the people who work in my media function I poached from agencies. And yeah. But when you start to build a center of gravity within a brand or an enterprise company full of people who have been around the ad tech circuit, who have been around the agency circuit, who have managed accounts and have seen kind of the nitty-gritty details of media, that really changes your perspective, I think, as a brand overall about your product and service offerings as well.
The flip side of that is that your team's experience absolutely develops and grows with your strategy, but they don't have the context of other categories to learn from and other pieces of business. I would say that one of my biggest clients is enterprise and outcomes-based, and primarily outcomes-based. And I would say that our relationship has benefited hugely from deep collaboration around different pockets of the organization. You talked about, originally you mentioned it being quite disorganized. You know, I'm just conscious working with very big organizations how the Madtech people aren't necessarily talking with the AdTech people, who aren't talking with the brand people, who aren't talking with the performance people. And often it's the agency at the center who's connecting these different bodies within the organization, and that cohesiveness allows us to move forwards and innovate. So,
But that means you get the blame too.
fine, we'll take it. You know, but I think that's the point. You know, the job of an agency is to be invested in the success of their client, and in order to do that, we need to innovate and move the business forward.
What's your view then on, I mentioned earlier about, you know, consultancies now buying media, brands building tech, agencies becoming consultants. What about the tech layer of it? And tech layers trying to, you know, almost disintermediate the agencies and the consultancies from the equation and go straight to the brands. They want to work directly with brands like EA because EA are being smart, and while they're using agencies in certain areas, they want to kind of get the agency out of the mix. Are you finding that a struggle when you're working with tech vendors?
So what's interesting I've observed is that the same vendors are approaching agency and client.
Right.
That's my observation. And then I'm observing that different conversations are occurring without anyone entirely knowing. And actually, this is something that we've recognized recently with a client, and we are going to sit with them in a room and map out who's been discussing what with whom and work out a strategy in terms of who owns the conversation. Now, with an agency that has a less productive relationship, obviously, you know, that can lead to quite a messy outcome. But I think the onus on an agency that is trying to contribute to the strategic and business growth of a client is to ensure that these conversations are open.
I think in a large global company as well, kind of to your earlier point, we see that all the time. We go in and talk to 5 different departments across a company. Left hand never knows what the right hand's doing, and the agency is typically the only people that have a sort of helicopter view of what's going on, at least from the media buying side of the house. The problem is when you've got big global companies, especially CPGs, they don't normally have one agency. There'll be 5 or 46 in the case of one client.
46 agencies?
46 agencies globally. And
Media
that was,
or
globally, yeah.
No,
I
media.
see that a lot.
So it was like, and seriously, it's a goat rodeo in there, trying to get people to talk to each other and plan and get it. Literally, it took us 3 months just to get a rolled up media budget for everywhere so we could do some analysis around it. So it really does, like, I think that whole conversation around you've got to have at least someone that has some oversight, whether it's a consulting firm, agency, that you can see across departments and try and get some sense to what's going on. Because you see mass, like people reinventing the wheel with tech, people having completely different buying models. They'll be using 20 different programmatic buyers and not left hand doesn't know what the right hand's doing. They're massively overspending as well. So I think there's got to be a general kind of rethinking in large organisations about the way they've siloed themselves internally, the way they've KPI'd all of their people to just be so one-eyed about what they're trying to do that they don't really care what's happening around them. You can't do cross-channel marketing if people aren't talking to each other.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and I think I am really happy to be on this stage representing EA because we have centralized a lot of those conversations, and so we don't have those problems that I used to run into when I was on the agency side. But I would even say that for companies who do face those challenges, now they are hubbing their own center of excellence and trying to be their own agency. So if I think about something like what a Pernod Ricard is doing, they may not be doing all of their execution in-house, but they're at least trying to make themselves, or an internal piece of themselves, the agency that coordinates everything that's going on in disparate markets. And I think that's a trend I've seen a lot from organizations who've typically been so decentralized. They're now realizing that the left hand doesn't know what the right hand are doing, and they're trying to solve for that internally.
I agree. I've observed that trend as well. Yeah. And I think from an agency perspective, it's a very welcome one. But again, I don't think a center of excellence, from what I've seen, can do it single-handedly. So I think they always benefit from having the ally with the helicopter view.
I was going to ask, I mean, does it work? It's all well and good saying we have a centre of excellence, we have a hub, a global hub that has an oversight, but that doesn't necessarily mean they have any control or any power to do anything at all. And you talk about 46 agencies. I've experienced that personally, where the global hub will go to Denmark, for example, and say, we want you to use this agency. This is our global agency. And they go, no.
No, they usually smile and say, yeah, we'll do that, and then just
And
do
then
whatever
don't,
they
and then
want.
do whatever they want. Exactly. So that hub is sitting there going, I've got absolutely no power over this. I can't do anything about it. They've chosen to use this agency, and I want to use that agency.
Yeah.
Where do you
It's actually
start
a
with
rare
that?
company, and we've worked with some very big global, we're talking like your MasterCards and Cokes of the world, where lots of people have a centre of excellence, but it's very rare where someone's actually got the gonk and they have control over the budget. Where they've got complete control over the budget, it works because they can throw their weight around. But if they're literally just someone trying to coordinate and influence people, it's incredibly hard to do.
Yep.
And there is a lot of resistance in companies like that because people still want to own their own P&L. So it's pretty hard to get past. And in my experience, the only way those companies that don't want to centralise more of that capability and don't want to centralise from a budget perspective or give up the control in the local markets, they typically are 100% reliant on agencies and consultancies to come in and play that role of glue, of getting people to work together and just kind of marshalling people in the right direction. And definitely, I think that's when they lean on you more for a technical assistance because they want someone to come in and say, right, enough arguments about what CRM we're going to use, we're just using this one and everyone's going to use it and that's the end of the conversation and they'll do a global deal. But then they've still got to get people on board and they've still got to push them down the road, which they normally do by funding them. So they'll say, we're making the decision, we're going to pay for it, you have to do it. But that's not, it's still not ideal.
That's not a long-term solution though, really, is it?
No. And it's really hard when it gets to execution, when it gets down the line to actually doing implementation and getting people to adopt it. If you don't have buy-in, the thing just dies a death. Like you buy a product, it sits in a corner for 2 years and then finance comes through and says, why isn't anyone using that? We're pulling the plug. So it's an ongoing challenge. I don't think it's something you can get fixed overnight.
No. Do you recommend, what proportion of clients that you work with do you recommend that they bring things in-house versus these agencies or build their own tech versus use existing tech?
I would say it probably depends. So to your point earlier about whether it's enterprise or whatever, it's actually more about how much first-party data that company has versus how much they're literally relying on brand advertising and stuff to get anything and then don't control the sale. So they're never going to be able to do attribution. It's a very different conversation with those guys than with like a bank or a MasterCard, somebody like that, where they've got all the first-party data and they know exactly what they're doing and they've got huge tech resources and huge amounts of data scientists where they actually just need help getting stuff stood up, training the people, hiring in the right talent, and then you can leave. So it's a different kind of conversation depending on where the vendor's at.
Whereas if you sell milk, you should not be trying to build a DMP.
No.
Just saying. At the same time, though, I agree with the logic behind your rationale. I guess the bit I would add to that is just because you're building your infrastructure and your DMP and your capability in-house, it doesn't mean that your agency should be relegated to execution alone. So that would be my plea to any
You're fighting the
clients out there
corner
listening.
for strategy.
I really am, because
No, I do.
Nobody else doing
can
it.
add value.
I agree as well on the sense that you see this happening, particularly DMP is a good example where people install it. They might even have data scientists internally that will be doing some analysis and feeding back. But actually what I find works the best is we've done loads of work with agencies and advertisers sitting down saying, right, how much access are you going to give the agency? Because if you're not going to give them any access, they can't help you. If you're going to try and do audience planning, these people are buying on a massive scale, so that of course they can give you feedback on what worked, not just for your campaigns, but everybody else's campaigns, and kind of guide you down a path. And if you have a more collaborative relationship with them, you'll both benefit from the conversation. But there has to be a certain amount of expertise internally to even have that conversation. So a lot of the time, they're just like throwing it over the fence to the agency and hoping for the best. Whereas the more sophisticated guys, once they've taken some of that capability in-house, that doesn't mean they're necessarily running the DMP in its entirety on their own, but they've got enough people internally with analysis skills that can work with an agency to get the most out of it.
Well, it needs companies like you to build the bridge, really, because otherwise you have one siloed team within a brand deciding they're going to build a DMP or pay for a DMP, not tell everybody else about it, and then nobody else gets using it. So you saying, it's, how much access do you want the agencies to give? How much access do you want your own internal teams to have as well? Because largely that doesn't even happen.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think to your earlier point as well about the vendors and where they fit into it, the reality is that most of the vendors they're there to sell software at the end of the day, and they will do consulting services, but they don't make money out of it. That's like a loss leader in most cases. They just want to get in, get it stood up and get out the door because that's not where the money is. So there's always going to be implementation services wrapped around that, whether it's a consulting firm, whether it's an agency, if you want it to actually succeed. If you want to just install something and then bugger off and good luck to you, that's a great model for losing clients maybe a year or 2 years down the line. And we see that happen a lot where clients will get unhappy and actually it's about the implementation that was the problem, not the software itself.
Yeah, makes sense. We're down to our last 5 minutes. I want to touch on the term marketing and what marketing means from a broader perspective of advertising. And we've got the term, what it was earlier, Madtech on the stage, which is the convergence of Martech and AdTech. And I want to understand from the three of you if you're seeing that happen and how you're seeing it happen and where you think the role that each of your constituent parts plays in actually helping the convergence of marketing and advertising, so that advertising isn't really ever doesn't need to be a thing anymore, particularly from an outcomes perspective. Belinda, from your perspective, are you seeing advertising and marketing, they're the same thing? Should they be the same thing?
No.
Awesome,
I think
thanks. What was hoping to say?
No, mic drop, done. No, it's funny. I am pretty disappointed by advertising disguising itself as marketing, and by how much everyone is rushing to want to be a robot, quite frankly. Like, we want algorithms, auto-optimizers, predictions, like black box modeling, and like, sure, maybe that's great for advertising. To me, that doesn't equal marketing. Marketing is like the art and the science of building a brand, of connecting with consumers, of understanding how to navigate your brand in a competitive market and kind of plan for the future and all of those good things. We hired into our in-house team probably about 30 people last year. And the number of interviews I had where people could tell me like what their favorite programmatic topic was or their favorite like bid optimization trick to do was, and did not have one original thought for how do you launch a new IP in a really competitive window, and what are some like media activations that might break through on that, and just like the shock and horror on people's faces when you ask them actual marketing questions. And we've really just been in this echo chamber of who has the most skill or the latest trick, or who found bid caching first, or, you know, what are undisclosed fees. And we've been so narrowed down this path that people think like that's all that matters, and that is marketing.
You've lost the ability to think for yourselves and come up with new creative ideas.
I think so,
that
yes.
For you is the concern of kind of advertising and marketing merging and becoming one thing. Is marketing still needs to have an element of brand about it, and bringing advertising into that fold means it might not do anymore.
And there's just hundreds of years of marketing science that we completely disregard because someone's DMP told me, like, these 5 cookies were the same person.
Yeah. Seriously.
I mean, I see your point. I completely see your point. Shula, what's your perspective on that and kind of what Belinda said?
I like to think that agencies can offer the breadth between the art and the science. And I would suggest that the role of an agency is to provoke and challenge a client to not go down that sort of tunnel thinking, which is easily done because the figures are in front of you. I think what we're all trying to demonstrate is the contribution of brand ultimately to a sale. And in order to do that, you need to consolidate and organize together around a consumer journey in a way where everyone has visibility on the outcomes.
Fiona, whose job is that?
Interesting question. I just was wanting to comment. I 100% agree with you on
Please do.
the whole, there's so much tech and so much opportunity to optimize the hell out of everything that people have just forgotten how to do the basics right. Like, we will still go in somewhere where they'll be talking to us about bid optimizing, and they're not even doing basic shit like frequency capping or simple things like I'm sending out emails to people, they're not opening them, do I retarget them on media? Like, really simple stuff, because people have got so wrapped around the axle on what's the new shiny toy that the basics of marketing have just kind of gone out with the dishwater or something, I'm not sure. But I guess to answer your question about whose job is it, I think it's a collective, actually, because I think there's a reason people are taking a certain amount of the tech internally, and it's not just because of control of data. They're trying to understand their own ecosystem better. And 100% from where I sit, it's attribution. So where the two connect now, it's not about that they're the same function that advertising is part of marketing.
Yeah.
It is a marketing channel, and
Attribution is always labelled under marketing.
Yeah.
It's not really called advertising attribution, it's marketing attribution. So
yeah, it is, absolutely.
it makes sense for it to be folded together.
Yeah, and I think that people have started to understand that if you're not doing multi-touch attribution, you're probably overvaluing one channel ridiculously more than you should.
Yeah.
And in some respects, undervaluing brand marketing.
Yeah.
Because when you see the full funnel in an organisation where they have got good attribution, you can see that brand advertising absolutely still works if it's done in the right way and in conjunction with some of the lower funnel stuff.
Absolutely.
So I think that you basically have to have some expertise in-house. You have to have a good relationship with your agency. So bashing them around the head on dollars and then wondering why they're treating you like shit is kind of stupid. And using like a consulting firm to come in and help around a specific area. So you can't be an expert in everything. I'm not. So, if you want to get some advice on a particular area and get some tactical help as the way to kind of take yourself forward, I think that's a good mix of, but you can't, I don't believe in outsourcing everything completely, because then you've got a whole organisation that doesn't know anything about themselves.
And do you think, there's a lot of talk, and we had this conversation on stage in Singapore as well, of the term of marketer versus advertiser. Do you think that clients, brands should be called marketers or advertisers?
Well, they're both, aren't they? And there's also the marketer, which is a marketer and a publisher.
Yeah, you have to add something else in, didn't you? Yeah. Marketer. Yeah. Okay.
But honestly, it's, to me, advertising is marketing. It's just another marketing channel. So I think there's a very specific way that you execute advertising. You have to have a very specific set of skills to do that well, but it is part of the marketing mix overall. And if you think it more holistically as marketing, you've got a better chance of doing more joined up kind of marketing customer journeys and having a better chance of giving people a good experience with your marketing.
Shula, your clients, are they marketers or advertisers? Or marketers?
I'm relieved that this navel gazing is restricted to stages and that we're not going home and doing our day jobs and thinking, am I a marketer or an advertiser? I guess I would agree.
You're surprised. People care more about this than you think. The amount of conversation I've had recently about this is worrying, to be honest, but
yes,
which is why I ask.
It's quite existential, isn't it? I would say, I would agree with you. Advertising is a discipline within the marketing profession. So I guess I would say marketing.
And Belinda, what are you?
Everything. I would just say there are 4 Ps. Your product is marketing. Your distribution is marketing. Advertising is definitely marketing. In some cases, it's not even the biggest piece of it, though.
No.
I would say what I'm hopeful for, and my excitement, is that all of my competitors think of themselves as advertisers and get really obsessed with trying to attribute all of their media to an in-sale and totally forsake brand marketing so that I can win. So that's my hope for me.
Great response. And on that note, I want to say thank you very much, my panellists, Fiona, Shula, Belinda. Round of applause.